Have you ever wondered what the ideal Soviet city looks like? Well, depending on where you live, some people probably don't have to wonder. However, for those who only recognize communism from memes, I have a little guide today. Food insecurity, walking to work through the woods, or huge queues to the doctor are just some of the things that await my residents in this video. My name is Onion King, and today I will try to build a beautiful Soviet town on a small island. Of course, I'm going to do it in Workers and Resources, Soviet Republic, a city builder game that's all about building statues like this. It's just a game. Anyway, I happen to install a mod from the Steam Workshop that adds a map of Europe. Because if you're going to create communism, then it's best to do it in Europe, right? Interestingly, on this map, the East belongs to the nasty capitalists, while the West belongs to the Soviets. It's clearly Europe from some alternative universe. At first, I was looking through the map, thinking where to create my city. By the way, it seems to me that Poland is missing something. And then I saw this beautiful island, perfect for setting up a truly Soviet city. There may not have been any raw materials here, but I could deal with that problem later. First, we had to start by building some flats. All in all, the future residents had a really good view from their window. Once I had built the first few apartment blocks, I could rename this town. Of course, I wanted it to be realistic, so the town was also the island of Gotland. Interestingly, I immediately had residents in these buildings. I don't know by what miracle they got to this island, but they showed that they were suitable to live in a Soviet city. However, I still had to meet their expectations. Therefore, I started by providing them with drinking water. I also built sewage. The rest of Europe doesn't have to get clean water. The important thing is that my inhabitants will be happy. And as for the drinking water, I took it straight from the sea on the other side of the island. Now all we needed was a passenger harbor so that the residents would have any contact with the world. It also seemed appropriate to connect all the buildings by road. I generally decided that I would make one long road here that everyone could drive around. It kind of looks like a racetrack, doesn't it? The harbor still needed a pavement so people could get here. All in all, they couldn't even get out of their houses, so they had to be rescued. And after a while, they set off to admire this beautiful town. Some liked it too much because they went straight to heaven. The rest didn't do so well. That's why people waited for someone to take them away. For that moment, it was the only place they could go. I still had to supply my residents with electricity, so I connected to the neighbor's grid. Of course, I was going to pay for it. I'm not a thief. Now all I had to do was pull the cables under the water. I think it would take a while. After that, all I had to do was make sure that the electricity would be supplied to all the buildings, making the final connection to the electrical substation. Apparently my residents were not happy, but in a Soviet city, you only find happiness in work, which was available across the sea because I wanted to see what would happen if I put all the production and service buildings off my island. I also had to change the name of this town. It may not have been the right place, but I named the area Gdansk. That will have to do for you. I also put a harbor here, of course. The only thing left to do was to see if anyone would want to come here. I even added a pub for them here. Now I had to somehow transport the citizens from one harbor to the other. They really wanted to get away from here. Of course, we needed ships. So I built a ship dock on my little island. Now I could buy different ships here. I decided on the Meteor passenger ship, which could hold over 100 people. It looks quite nice, doesn't it? Now all I had to do was connect the two harbors so that the ship knew where to go, and as you can see, it got straight to work. Although at one point I was no longer able to understand what it was actually doing as this ship started to return to port for unknown reasons. But as it turned out, it had to turn back in this strange way at all cost. And only now it approached the harbor to pick up people from there. Fortunately, a lot of people immediately boarded the ship, but it turned out that there were only 22 workers. It seemed to me that more people were standing on this harbor. In any case, the ship was able to sail towards the other town to drop off the workers there. In fact, this journey took quite a long time. Eventually, it did arrive, and these 22 workers were able to disembark. However, only 5 got off the ship. At least they were heading towards the pub, where they could work, of course, but they lacked customers here, and the rest were heading back to the island, where another group was waiting for the ship. And again, people were going to work in the pub, but there were no customers here. I decided to buy more ships to get people off the island quicker. Whose idea was it to live on the island? By the way, something had to be done about the popularity, because people were complaining about everything, even about the death of children. Welcome to the Soviet city. Given that nobody wanted to use such a distant pub, I had to build them a new one on the island. Nothing like getting up at 7 a.m. and going for a beer in your bathrobe. Interestingly, there were no customers here either. Maybe the poor water quality is putting people off, though? Unfortunately, because of the low popularity, people started to flee the town, so I had to build even more apartment buildings. After a while, I found 2 customers in a pub on the mainland waiting for service, which was not there. I didn't see these guests either, but apparently they were here. In that case, even more housing had to be built in order to have the right number of residents in the city. The next step was to build a coal mine on a site with rich deposits. And given where the location was, I named it Berlin. I don't know if there is coal mined in Berlin, but in this version of Europe, it is quite possible. Of course, this meant that I had to build a big bridge leading across this river. But the most important thing was to convince the residents to come here to work, and they had a really big distance to travel. In a typical Soviet town, nobody complains that they have a long way to go to work. Unfortunately, for the time being, people only went to this pub. That's why I decided that I would build them a bus stop here so they could travel to work from here. Of course, this meant that I still needed a stop closer to the mine itself. That should be enough to make them want to come here, right? I was about to find out placing a building where I could buy vehicles. Unfortunately, I don't know that much about these cars, so I just bought a bus from the Soviet Union. Now we had to see if it would go there at all, and yes, it worked. The only thing that was missing were the people from the island. Fortunately, they were already slowly heading to work. Unfortunately, the bus had left the stop, so we had to wait until it returned. Rest assured, we had plenty of time. And do you know what you can do in your spare time? Build a helicopter platform. I wanted to see if people were going to be transported by helicopters to the hospital that I had built here as well. Of course, I had to place a helicopter parking lot, and I immediately bought 3 Soviet helicopters. Anything else my people would not fly. The main thing was that everything worked as it should, and clearly I could take passengers from here, or, to be more precise, as many as 2 employees who flew straight to work. And when that helicopter landed, those 2 people went to work at the hospital. From now on, we had a doctor, but I wasn't sure if the patients were able to get here. At least the helicopters were taking more staff. But because people were unhappy, I built them a new hospital on the island. And I also placed a cinema. Sometimes you have to take care of your residents. That's why I bought lots of ambulances that could go straight away to save people. Although looking at how they were driving, I wasn't convinced they wanted to save anyone. As for the hospital, there was a huge queue in front of it. Perhaps I had delayed the treatment of the residents for too long. After a while, I reminded myself of my mine in Berlin, but unfortunately, there were still no workers here. I decided that I would try to do one drastic thing, which was to build a very long bridge. I hoped that a direct connection would help the workers get to work. Once everything was in place, I sent a bus to the island, where it would take a number of hours to get there. But as soon as the bus arrived, it was able to pick up a few of the workers, which was not worth it at all. Looking for a solution on the internet, I found out that people travel by transport for a maximum of 4 hours and then disappear, or rather teleport back to their homes. Similarly, they wait only 1 hour at the bus stop, after which they also disappear. In that case, there was only one thing left for me to do, which was to build more bus stops along the entire route to the mine. It took a while because I had to place lots of bus stops. Once everything was in place, I had to manually mark where people should go when they reached a particular stop. This was also time-consuming. Unfortunately, this bridge didn't allow more bus stops to be connected for pedestrians, so I had to create a bridge for people over this river. Now, buses had to be allocated to these short routes. Of course, I had to purchase even more vehicles. Now I was really counting on everything working as it should. Suddenly, a huge crowd of people rushed out to the first stop, but the bus managed to leave earlier. Everyone had to wait for the bus to come back here, and finally it came. Fortunately, people wanted to get on the bus, so everything worked as it should. From what I noticed, some people walked directly from the bus stop to the next stop. After a while, a second bus came here and picked up the rest of the people. At the next stop, 2 people managed to get on before the bus left, but they went in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, it turned out that people were not waiting for the new vehicle, but instead they were walking through the forest. Although not all, as the rest politely took the bus and were able to get to the next stop comfortably. However, the people walking were faster and could already wait for the next transport. However, now the people who had just got off the bus started walking further. As you can see, the citizens of the Soviet city know well that life cannot be too luxurious. In the end, what counted for me was that they kept walking forward. Eventually, they reached a bridge where some traveled further by bus and the rest used this smaller pedestrian bridge. This was called true sacrifice to earn a few rubles for bread. Only at the end, it turned out that people were standing at the last bus stop and didn't want to go to work, even though I had marked the building. As it turned out, the warehouse was already full and nothing could be done here, which meant someone had come here earlier and mined some coal. In that case, I had to build a coal processing plant next to it. I immediately connected it to the path, because this was now where people were going to work in the first place. Meanwhile, in the town, ambulances were constantly having to rescue someone. And even though the island wasn't big, everyone still had to waste time driving here because of the fact that there was only one road. The hospital was constantly overcrowded, and in fact I noticed then that the garbage dump was also overcrowded and in more than one building. So it was a good idea to place some garbage containers all over the island. And somewhere on the side, if you can call it that, I made a place where all this trash would be deposited later. Maybe in the future I will think about transporting it off the island. In fact, since the residents were already getting to work in Berlin, I could remove this bridge, which turned out to be totally unnecessary. Just someone was using it, so I had to wait a while. Although this bus still had a long way to go, and when it finally made it, I got rid of that bridge. Now I could deal with the happiness of my residents, whose children were still dying. I didn't have any solution for that, but I could build a small shopping center so that people could buy themselves some TV, instead of crying after losing a child. All in all, I forgot about some garbage trucks, so I quickly built a place to buy vehicles. I bought several types of garbage trucks because I didn't know what would be most useful. Now I had to distribute them around the different buildings. And eventually they could set off to save the city from disaster. In this way, the buildings quickly got rid of all the rubbish. At one point, there was an unexpected earthquake, which fortunately didn't cause any tsunami that could flood this island. However, one of the buildings started to burn down. It took me a while to discover what was burning, and indeed, we had a fire. So I quickly had to build a fire station, otherwise the whole island was in danger of burning down. Considering how slow the construction was going, it was a possibility. Once the fire station was ready, I had to buy some vehicles quickly. Now we needed a few employees to operate these fire trucks, and finally someone rushed to rescue the people on this island. Let's just hope it's not too late. Of course, the fire had already started to spread, so several buildings had to be saved, but as you can see, the fire brigade in this game is really reliable. They can even extinguish fire while standing on the other side of the building. After a while, the situation was brought under control, and I got a report saying that only one person had died. I think that can be considered a success. As for the rubbish, it was slowly deposited on the side of the island. The capacity was quite large, so the residents do not need to worry about this problem. For the next few months, they were spending most of their time off the island anyway, heading to work on foot. The most important thing was that some coal ore had been processed, and it was now possible to try to get our own electricity. The coal power plant was really big, and there wasn't even room to put it somewhere on the island. It wouldn't even fit on this one. After all, why build somewhere far away when you can put it next to coal processing building to transport the coal to the power station straight away? While waiting for that big building to be constructed, I put up more apartment blocks on the island. I even built them a basketball court so they wouldn't sit all day in front of that one TV available for the whole island. Meanwhile, the coal was already being sent to the coal power plant, so everything was working as it should. Only there was a shortage of workers, who of course were commuting all the time. I don't even want to know how long it took them to get from their flats to work. The most important thing was that finally the residents could start working at the power station, so the town had its own electricity from now on. Granted, there weren't too many workers here, but the important thing was that someone got here and worked for the whole community. At least now we could stop buying electricity from abroad. Of course, I had to make a new electricity line that went from Berlin all the way to our island, which was already looking better and better. Admit it yourselves, you've never seen a more beautiful Soviet island in your life, with even more flats on it. This allowed us to produce even more sewage flowing straight into the sea. Now all that remained was to develop the industrial district by placing more production buildings. Eventually, there were plenty of people heading there ready to work hard. We started with fairly basic things like chopping down the surrounding trees, and since people had somewhere to sleep and somewhere to work, we still had to make a place for them to relax. The best place for this was Italy, where I wanted to create a tourist district. I even placed a proper monument here that everyone would want to visit, and I called the whole village Rome. I think that was more appropriate. Of course, a long road had to be dragged directly to Berlin, which meant making a tunnel here so that the road went under the mountains, and in the end I connected everything perfectly with my industrial district. There was only one hotel in Rome for the time being, and there was basically no transport here, so I had to change that. The best way to get tourists there was to build a train station right next to the bus stop in Berlin. Maybe the people from the island had a long way to go, but they had nothing better to do anyway. Apart from work, of course. Now the long tracks had to be made, which I tried to put not far from the road I had created earlier. And while I was building these tracks, it turned out that there was a fire at the power station. Well, the fire brigade is unlikely to get here, and I really had a lot of firefighters on the island. Of course, after a while, the power station had to be rebuilt. Later, I bought the first train that was supposed to take people on a trip to Rome, but not all the tracks were finished yet, so it couldn't set off. However, after a while, it was gone and the train station was starting to fill up. For the moment, 6 passengers were on the train, presumably to work at the hotel. It quickly entered a tunnel leading through the nearby mountains. They had a really good route to take here. Meanwhile, more people were heading for the train station where they had to wait a bit. After a while, the hotel workers arrived in Rome, and now they might as well rest here, heading to work past a monument of a man without whom this Soviet city would not exist, which may have had only one hotel. But let's not forget that this is a Soviet city. It can't be too luxurious here. More and more people wanted to go on holiday, so I bought another train with even more wagons, which was so long that it couldn't turn around in the normal way. So I had to make new tracks, which I wanted to connect to the old ones on the other side. This way the train could finally move on to Rome. In this way, I managed to create a Soviet city on an island where I accommodated some citizens ready to explore Europe in different ways every day. At one time, they were able to use the only bus stop on the island, which, however, proved unprofitable. But this did not discourage the locals who continued to come in large numbers to live on the island. At least they were able to pollute the sea and make life miserable for other Europeans. And they did so in a variety of pollution-related ways, and they used ships to get to the mainland to work. However, sometimes there were crashes. Of course, occasionally there was someone who managed to get to their destination. As a result, they were able to go to the bus stop to continue their journey. Admittedly, some preferred to walk across Europe, reaching their work in the industrial district after many hours. However, there were some lucky ones who were able to go to the train station to go on holiday, as long as they made it in time for the train, because that was a big problem. Often people had to wait there. However, when they finally managed to catch the train, an unforgettable journey across Europe awaited them, where the final destination was a resort in communist Rome, which had as much as one hotel and a small park with a monument. At least the view from the window was unremarkable. Well, okay, actually they had the same view in their flats on the island, but don't tell them that. And this is what a perfect Soviet city looks like, where everything is far away, people die waiting to go to the doctor, and the only interesting entertainment is getting drunk. Don't try to imitate this behavior at home. I would like to thank you for watching this video. I certainly wouldn't be offended if you left a like and subscribed to my channel. Thank you to all the people who have chosen to subscribe to me so far. Here's a list of the most recent subscribers, or at least the ones that show up in my dashboard. If anyone is still here, I encourage you to watch my latest Cities Skylines 2 video, where I created the worst city that somehow nobody wanted to escape from. Just click here and you can see this masterpiece. It really doesn't hurt. Go ahead and do it, you dirty peasant.